Hey guys, it's Dave. If you've been around Hoya for a while, you've grown some mature plants, you have no doubt lost some that seemingly died out of nowhere. You could make an argument that maybe there were underlying causes, kind of like that Hemingway quote, how did you go bankrupt? Two ways, gradually, then suddenly. So something may have been going wrong for quite some time and just caught up with the plant. This is not one of those plants. This one has been trouble since the day I bought it. Today is its last day before the compost bin, and I am going to diagnose what's gone wrong with this plant so that it may help you with a plant that just isn't genetically doomed like this one apparently was. Stick with me. Let's start first with what we have here. This is a latifolia, the out of variegation obviously. This is very commonly misstated as being macrophylla. It is sold that way. Sometimes it's denoted as being formerly known as macrophylla. That's all incorrect. This has never been anything but an outer variegated latifolia. There's a long story behind it. There may be in this world somewhere a real macrophylla, but this has just been called by the wrong name for a long time. I got this from a local nursery, but they buy plants from Costa Farms too. This is one of those plants. When I got it home, it was in a quite large, I think a 6-inch pot, and barely rooted. And I mean barely rooted into this huge pot of pure cocoa peat. So I got it out of that. It struggled for forever. Then it finally grew up into a decent plant, and then it collapsed. And then I started it over again. Long story short, it's been started over 3 separate times, I am sure of. It has been grown in denser mixes, not as dense. It's been grown in plastic. It has been grown in basalt. It has been given every chance, and yet it gets to a certain point like this, and it just goes straight downhill. I'm not going to try anymore. My time may not be valuable, but it's too valuable to spend on a plant that just doesn't seem to want to live. I've known this plant was in a struggle for a while now, and I don't want to say that I didn't care. Let's just leave it at that, okay? I figured a Hoya is capable of producing new roots. It could either do that or not, and if it didn't, I would make a video about it. Well, here we are. So it looks good, right? And this is why I advocate for hands-on plant care. You know, I move a lot of plants around to get them watered, move one out of the way or the other, and I'm constantly checking for something, not just pests. So there are a few things that tell me something's wrong with this plant. One of the first ones was this growth right here just kind of stopped. You know, it just was starting, and then the plant abandoned that project, which led me to, are the leaves still firm? And they're not. I know some people like to have the taco test before they water a leaf. I am not in that group of people ever. I would never stress a plant out, especially a thick leaf like this, to the point where it is dehydrated like this and then water it, because you can do what you want. I have to consider the roots. And if the leaves are that dehydrated, what's happening to the root structure? That's my main concern. Okay, let's look at a leaf up close that isn't problematic. But I see this, or I used to see this on Facebook all the time. Here's one that's got both problems I want to look at. So those spots there are just from edema. And that is from, people call it inconsistent watering, and I suppose that's fair enough, but if the pot gets very, very dry, and the roots get very, very dry, and you water it thoroughly, it's going to greedily suck up as much water as possible, and the leaves are simply not going to be able to transpire all that water, so these cells burst. That is harmless. What is not harmless are those spots there. And that is not fungal. You would see a ring if it were that kind of traditional fungal. And it goes through to the front of the leaf there. Here are a couple of more examples of that. And again, on the other side of the leaf. That is not good. That is an indication of root rot. So we have growth that was abandoned. We have leaves that are soft even when it's watering it, which really is probably all we really needed. And these spots. In the order it happened, I noticed first that the leaves were, some of the leaves, I should say, were a little bit soft, not all of them. Then the spots started to appear, and then the growth came out that was abandoned. So 3 bad signs, and anybody who's been around Hoya for any amount of time would already have this diagnosed long ago. But if you are newer to Hoya, like so many of you are, this is what to look out for. Then there's the cherry on top. Okay, I went ahead and took out the tower trellis just so we could get a better look. When you see roots, well, that was a rather dramatic example. When you see that your root ball or your plant is very loose in the pot, that is not a good sign. So let me just clean off the old substrate. As I noted, I have known that this plant was struggling for quite a while. I made a decision that it's going to live or die on its own. It could put off new roots in theory. It has not been my experience that happens very often. It just seems to want to try to live off of the desiccated roots that are already there unless you do the chop. Again, I'm not going to do the chop. You know, once, twice, 3 times, that's enough for me to know that this plant is just a genetic dud. And it's had the best of everything here. I really like this plant. So I made a good faith effort, I would say. And there are plants that have suffered some cold damage that I don't much care about. You know, I'm not going to go the extra mile for those, but as you can see, this is just completely ruined. There are plants, large plants, like I said, that can go downhill very quickly, even for the most experienced growers. How long it had been slowly, gradually going downhill before it suddenly died, you know, who knows? That's probably case by case, and I wouldn't make any huge generalizations on that. But as a newer grower to this, those are those key things you're going to look out for. Keep an eye on something like this. This would immediately get my attention because it is clearly not pests and it is clearly not edema. With those 2 things ruled out, that means root problems. Now, this used to be a leaf that was incredibly firm and quite a lot thicker than it is now. Now it's very floppy and everybody would know there's a root problem here. But to have a plant with as many very firm leaves as I had, to see it start getting soft again, that's when I knew I had a problem. And because of my experience with this particular plant, I already knew what was happening. And like I said, at that point, I just didn't care anymore. I'm not going to spend any more time on this plant. But as someone newer to Hoya, keep an eye on that. If you're watering your plants and you start getting soft leaves, especially it happens so often in Lacanosa croniana, you've got a root problem. I mean, you just do. It stinks, but you're going to have to start over the plant, make some decisions, chop and prop, you know. But when you see spots like this, if you kind of miss the soft leaves, if you're not handling your plant, you have a problem. You know, it's not pests, it's not edema. That is a root problem. Let's just rule out the new growth getting abandoned because you might not catch that right away. But when you saw, okay, this is such an exaggerated example, but I will often, when I'm watering plants, say in the tent where I have a whole bunch of plants, as I'm watering them, even though they look good, I will give a little tug and make sure it's in that pot really well, because the plant can look amazing for a very, very long time before the leaves start showing any signs of distress, if it's a leaf like this. Now some are going to be very dramatic, like what do I have? Boati is a very thin leaf plant. It's going to look horrible pretty quickly. But this can go on and on and on for months, as it has right here. And then by the time you bother to check the roots, this is what you have. Now, if this weren't an unhealthy plant, would it make that much difference if you caught it immediately and chopped and propped, or if you did it now? I don't know that it would. I think your chances of success would probably be just about the same, as long as these stems are viable. And let's just find out what those look like real quick. Make a little noise here. And everything is milky. So still viable. I have no doubt that if it were a healthy plant, I'm going to keep saying that, that this could be chopped and propped. But we hope to avoid that. And in my book, I don't really give advice to people, but I do recommend avoiding the advice to always letting your plant completely dry out before you water it. I really think in most cases, you're just begging for trouble. I think most people that report good long-term Hoya health water their plants. And then when they don't water their plants, they say they would be growing better. I mean, we've all had that experience. And I think we've gotten to the point where we're afraid to water our plants. Now, that's not the case with this one. I was not afraid to water this plant. I'm not afraid to water any of my plants. I mean, I'm not reckless, don't get me wrong, but I'm not scared that it has to be absolutely dry and then go for 3 or 4 or 5 more days and the leaves have to be practically falling off the plant before I'll give it a drink. I'm not that person. But those are the symptoms. These questions come up a lot on Facebook groups, and I hope this was helpful. Helpful signs to look at that your plant may be in a little bit of trouble. If you can catch it before the roots are completely desiccated, maybe put it in a little different mix if it needs to be more moisture rich, etc., or vice versa. Maybe you can catch it then. Anyway, I will catch you in the next one real soon, okay? Bye-bye.